without further ado, it's my extreme pleasure to introduce you to Aaron Logan. Aaron is a high school administrator at Northside ISD in San Antonio, Texas, and we're thrilled to have him here with us. So, Aaron, floor is yours.
Hey guys, welcome. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Real quick, at the very top of the chat, I put a link to a Google Drive that I shared with you guys. It's additional resources and kind of some of the resources we'll be going over today. I do this not because I claim to be an expert at this, but because I love talking about it and trying to figure out how we can really address all students' needs, and especially those students with IEPs. Real quickly about myself, I don't want to talk too much about this because I do want to be able to get to questions and talk about the process of implementing it. I am a campus administrator right now. I am currently implementing this on our campus, what I'm talking about, but I also was a special education co-teacher for over 10 years and implemented this kind of out of frustration. So I started sharing this. This is my first time to share it live on a Zoom or virtually, I should say. Additionally, I am actually just finishing up my PhD, which very much coincides with this. I'm just starting my dissertation, so in the approval process, which is making my life crazy. But I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I really appreciate you guys. And I will ask some questions of you guys. If you see me looking to the side, I apologize. I have two screens, and sometimes I'm looking at information to the right. I'm not ignoring you guys. So if you have any questions, of course, put them in the Q&A. And I'm in San Antonio, Texas. I know everyone's putting in there where they're from. So that's awesome to be talking to so many people across the country. So again, improving the way we co-teach through intervention and retention. And we'll kind of talk about the intervention piece and then retention. I've almost changed that a couple times, but really what I'm meaning by retention is memory retention. So we'll talk about some of those strategies. Okay, so first thing I want you to do is think about the last time you were in a co-teach classroom, whether you're teaching, whether you're an administrator. I want you to think about that for a second. I'm going to give you guys just a few seconds to think about that, get that visual in your head. Also, real quick, one thing I meant to ask you guys to do, could you also put your role in the chat real quick? It depends if I'm talking to teachers, administrators. Hopefully we got a mix, but if you could do that for me real quick as well. Okay, I see a lot of interventionists. That's awesome. Awesome. All right. That's great. Assistant principal. Oh, great. This is good. Okay, so a lot of leadership. That's good. And this is good either way if we're talking about how you get introducing this, which I could talk about, or just things you can use as a teacher. Does anyone want to, maybe one person, talk about their last experience with seeing a co-teach or being in a co-teach classroom? And if not, I'll just jump in with my experience here. So I see some positives there too. So I'll just kind of jump in. I'm not sure if you guys are able to speak or not, but so I remember I was first talking about a teacher as being a co-teacher. My last year, I'm just a few years removed from being in the classroom. I had a great experience with a teacher that we were doing a lot of this stuff. But then I'd get frustrated because I have 2 or 3 classes, and then I would go on and I'd move on to my other classes where I had basically had very limited role. So it got me to thinking, what exactly, and that's what I call the good, the bad, and the ugly. So there's some great co-teaching you'll see. There's some just bad teaching, you're not sure what the one teacher's role is. And kind of everything in between. And as an administrator, especially with my team last year, we started to see this a lot. We'd go in for observations and be like, oh, that was great. Or a lot of our responses was, what was the co-teacher doing? And, it was like, oh, it was okay. So what we've done this year is, and what I'm talking about here is putting a system, really a curriculum in place for your campus. So, ask yourself, what are your, what systems are in place for your district, your campus, for your co-teachers? What are we doing to provide them with the necessary tools and resources? And I'm going to try to do a poll here real quick. I saw that here, and let's see if we can, let me see if I can do that. If not, then I'll move on. Okay, for some reason, I'm not seeing my poll now. So sorry, guys. I'm going to go ahead. So I'm just going to get into it. So one of the great things I did coach for about 10 years as well is when you look at great organizations, when you start thinking about this and you think about your campus, or you think about as an instructional leader, what are you going to do? How are you going to get this? The first step is really talking about having a universal language. So Pete Carroll, one of the coach of the Seattle Seahawks, he likes to say no synonyms. So you go to Seattle, they're gonna talk like Seahawks, and they're gonna use the same language. So that's really the first step, is deciding your language and the skill sets necessary. So when I talk about a co-teach curriculum, this is our goal today, is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about providing your co-teachers with a flexible, student-centered process that allows them to address all student needs, develop a common language for co-teaching on your campus, which is what I was just talking about there. Provide co-teachers and instructional leaders with a set of core skills for co-teaching. Extremely important, right? So when you have those post-conferences or even pre-conferences, you can focus on those skills and how they relate to them being evaluated, and also what you expect to see. And providing a clear picture. Everyone should understand what it looks like on your campus and what good co-teaching looks like. Okay, and the last part of it is, of course, we cannot forget about the students without IEPs, right? So we're talking about co-teach classrooms where there's two teachers and there's students with IEPs, students without IEPs. In Texas, we'll have a lot of students with English second language. We'll have a lot of those students. So you have to make sure you're accounting for all of that, which is often a very big challenge. So when I talk about the process here, this is what we're going to be looking at today. Engaging instruction. Now, there certainly are plenty of techniques that I'll mention that focus on when you're giving initial instruction. But where I found the easiest way to teach, and also the easiest way for myself to really use a lot of these strategies, is after instruction. So more of that intervention process. So when you're looking at the tiered intervention, it's an intervention in your classroom. That's where you can really leverage both your teachers. And this is what that includes. You have some sort of assessment, which assessment can be anything from thumbs up, thumbs down, to an exit ticket, to a unit test. You sort your data, and those that got it, they need that get that extension or that retention activity, and also those that didn't get it. And we're looking at intervention structures, intervention groups. So this process that we're looking at, and that I'll share with you, I'm sharing the high leverage practices. Also talk about that site a little bit, which are a set of practices that have come out that have been published since 2017. And also this brain-based learning, when we talk about the ones that they do get it. So we're steeping it in research. And I think one of the things we need to do as instructional leaders is make sure it's our job to bring that research into the classroom for our teachers to help them use research-based practices. Teachers already have an enormous amount on their plate. I really see that as the instructional leader's role, to make sure they're finding things, presenting it in a way that is consumable for our teachers. So I've broken this down into a skill set. So these are the skills that I'm currently working at Brennan High School in San Antonio, Texas. These are the skills we're implementing on our campus, and we're chunking up the trainings, and I'll talk about that a little bit at the end. And if anyone has any questions, can certainly address that. So implementing this, it would be over, like, we're taking a year to implement it. So over 3 to 4 sessions. Okay. So, but assessment, timing, and type. So you have to understand assessments, how to design them for your classes and what they may produce. Student grouping strategies, we'll talk about. Student-centered co-teaching structures and how to apply them. So we're going to ask ourselves questions like, why are we co-teaching? Why are we using structures? And then retention strategies. So retention strategies help improve and strengthen our learning for those who get it. So those are the 4 skills that we focus on, and again, that I'm presenting here for you to consider. Of course, your skills might be different. You might decide with your team that, hey, Mr. Logan, that's we want to do something else. But the most important thing is that everyone knows what the skills are, and your coaches understand what they are, and they can identify where the teacher needs help, and it can give them strategies. Okay, so first we're going to jump right into designing assessments for intervention and retention. So 2 things we'll talk about is timing and type. So as far as timing, that's something that is pretty much understood, right? When we think about assessments, we think about timing. So if you see on my chart here, is timing is real. So it just means, okay, is it a pre-assessment? We have our instructions. Is it a formative assessment that gives us feedback? Is it a summative assessment, right? So this is like an end of unit. So that's assessment timing. That's when it happens within the cycle of a unit, cycle of a lesson. So more what I want to focus on here, which we'll break down more, is assessment type. So there are 3 types of assessments that we teach our teachers and our co-teachers. So there's what we call a proficient, non-proficient assessment. So this basically has a yes or no. This is like if you do thumbs up, thumbs down in the classroom, where you basically have 2 options. Did they get it? Did they not get it? So it's, are they proficient at it or are they not? And so that's going to give you a certain type of grouping when we get there. A scaffolded assessment. So that's the second type. So a scaffolded assessment means that the skills in the assessment build upon each other, right? So if you're talking, we'll look at some algebra examples. So if you're talking about 1-step equations, you need to understand that before you go to 2-step, and 2-step the multi-step. So there's a scaffolding to the skills. And then there's a mixed assessment. So something like a unit review that takes from a bunch of different things, where you could have multiple outputs for your data. So those are the 3 assessments that we focus on. And so we ask our teachers to ask themselves, how many skills are we evaluating? What is the relationship of those skills, and how many data points? So that's what we're going to look at here. So this is an example of non-proficient and proficient. So I give you there an English example. Jack and Jill went up the hill to get some water, right? So they have to paraphrase that. So they're either able to paraphrase it or they're not. So that would dictate the type of data you'd get. You get 2 data points, right? The non-proficient and the proficient. And we'll kind of look later how that kind of ties into our groupings, the grouping options we have based on that data, and then our intervention structures or our co-teach structures. So that's pretty easy to understand. If you have a question, again, just throw it in the Q&A too, if you have any, as I go through this. Scaffolded assessment. So as I had mentioned, 1-step equation, 2-step equations, multi-step equations. So these build on each other, right? So you have to understand one before you go to the other. So if you look at that, here's your data sort for that. So basically you can have 4 groups, right? You can have, if you didn't get anything, then you'd start in a group that's focusing on the 1-step, like if you just have no understanding of it. Also 2-step, if they got the 1-step, then they go the 2-step. If they got the 2-step, they go to multi-step. And then if they mastered everything, then you have your retention. Okay, so you can see how your assessments directly relate to your grouping, right? And we will talk about 2 grouping options that you'll have. And so I meant to mention also with the presentation, it's scaffolded. So everything we're doing kind of builds on each other. And at the end, you'll have a clear understanding. So kind of hang with me there. So the last type is our mixed assessment, right? So I just did a science example here where you have different science categories that might be in a unit review, or you might be getting ready for Texas. We have the STAR, which, but you might be getting ready for that stuff. So they could be in multiple groups. They could, I could score well on 3 and not 1, but I could just miss them all. So you get a little more flexibility where you're going to put the student. And so this is what we'd call a mixed assessment. And again, this is our language. If you're doing something like this, hopefully at least it spurs an idea like, hey, we need to start naming so that when I say mixed assessment on our campus, our co-teachers should understand what that means. And my other administrators should understand what that means. Okay. So any questions at this point? I'll just wait a second, see if we have any questions as I move through. If not, just you put them in the chat too. Okay, perfect. So we'll go ahead and move. Yes, I will define retention. That's actually the last part of it. So I'll just kind of hold that question. Okay. So real quick, when I say retention, I mean memory retention. So that's specifically what I'm talking about, memory retention strategies. And we'll go over 2 of them. Okay. So great question. I'll get to that. Absolutely. And that's kind of the last part of this. All right. All right. So I'm going to move on to grouping students if we're all good. So grouping students. So most of us have heard about mixed grouping or similar grouping, and that's what we're be talking about. So and mixed and also pairs is another grouping pairs. Don't underestimate how effective pairs can be as well. So so creating mixed ability groupings, and I'm actually going to share a tool here in a second. But if you were doing it by hand, here are the steps. Okay, so basically, you're getting your data and you're sorting them from least to great, and you'll see the tool does that for you. And then you start matching low to high and mixing them up. You may also have behaviors that you want to mix in there. That's kind of always your last look. You always want to take that consideration about behavior, and you may have ability groupings, mixed ability groupings, where you have 2 students who, when they're with each other, will cause problems. We know what it's like. So make sure you're doing that last step. In similar ability groupings, it's kind of what I showed in the algebra example, right? So 1-step equations, here they are similar. It doesn't matter if they have an IEP or not. That was your data. Here they go there. Ones that need 2-step go here. So that's similar ability. You're taking that data and you're providing that targeted instruction there for them. This is a grouping tool. I'm going to go over this real quick. It is you can scan it on your phone again. Usually I'm giving this live, and not that we're not live, but in person, I should say. So you can scan it there, but what you'll have access to, I'm going to show you guys this real quick, that's what I dropped into the chat earlier, at the very top of the chat. Okay. So this has all these things, and it has another copy of the slides. And so what we're looking at is a student grouping tool is at the very bottom. I'm going to share that tab instead. And the second, here at the bottom, you'll see there's an example. It should ask you hopefully to make a copy. So we're not, if it doesn't, then please make a copy before you use it. But I have all the instructions here on the second one. Okay. So you see here, I would enter in all my students, right? Low to high. And what the tool does for you is it gives you at the bottom, it gives you these student groups. And my teachers have really enjoyed this grouping tool because grouping can take a while. So it's really important you give them some sort of tool. So we don't want to pile on to our teachers for sure. So similar ability groups. So that meaning if you want to group them similarly about the same skill, and it's not cut and dry like the algebra one. If you're more going off like a grade, like if you're in English maybe. So the similar ability group, you read from right to left. So if I go from right to left, that'll be my similar ability group going from Kim all the way to Josh here. I go north to south for my mixed, if I want a mixed ability group as well. Okay. Now at the top, remember I talked about pairs. What's cool about this is if I go to 1, here are my pairs. Okay. So I just go right here. They're next to each other. So I can pair them up. Okay. So it does most of the work for you. Again, if you have an odd number, you might have to kind of manipulate things, but it does most of the work there for you. Okay. So, and if I have kind of 2 versions of this, so which I can drop the other one in there as well, but they both do the same thing. So it does the grouping for you and allows you to use those groups. So all right, let me get back to, hopefully you guys find that useful. But that is definitely one of the things as we've implemented this. There's really 2 things that our teachers have responded well to that I can talk about, and that's definitely one of them is being able to, that grouping tool. So, all right, so that's grouping. Anyone have any questions they want to throw in the chat about grouping that I can address here at this point? I want to make sure we've talked about, or if you had a question that just popped up about assessments, anything like that, anything we've covered so far. Okay, great. Hopefully that means I've been clear. or you know, like I said, I'm not claiming to be an expert. This could be things like, yeah, Aaron, we get it. So if you think of something, throw it in the chat. Right now, we're going to talk about kind of rethinking our structures. And what I mean by that is, let's think about, why do we use co-teaching structures, right? Why do we do this, right? I mean, I know we have 2 teachers in the classroom. So here's some things about structures. They allow us to provide students with services outlined in their IEP, right? That's okay. We need to follow the law, like, such as accommodation modifications and SDI. Also ask yourself, why are we using structures? Are we using it just because, hey, there's 2 teachers in the classroom, we better use structures, right? We got to prove that having 2 teachers is worth it, which I know some of that goes on, and our district's done some of that. They talk about cost and effectiveness, and they'll come through and they'll do the monitoring of this, our co-teachers, and try to decide if it's the best model. So I don't know if that's going on in your guys' states either, but I know in Texas that goes on quite a bit. Or are we utilizing structures to actually provide those interventions to students? You know, we've talked about 2 things currently. So setting up our assessments so that we understand where our students are at, and that there's 3 different types. And we've talked about two grouping types, really 4 if you include, you know, the pairs, because you can also use similar ability for pairs as well. But research shows, our recent research shows that despite, you know, different structures allowing you to provide direct teach and interventions that we'll look at, the one teach, one assist is still the most used. And we'll look at that. And so that's basically has the co-teacher in a subordinate role. And so let's start looking, and I label these, and this is how we talk about them on our campus, is student-centered structures is really what I call them. But student-centered co-teaching, student-centered structures is what I'll talk about with our co-teachers. And I'm lucky on my campus, I didn't say this before, but I am actually, they assigned me this year to our special education department. So I'm able to walk through and observe all our co-teachers. You may not have that ability, so you need to make sure that something you share and you get on the same page with all your administrators, but I am evaluating all of them. So that does help a lot. So as far as implementing the language and what we're doing. So that blue, I matched the blue there. It comes out a little bit there. Let me see here. I'm not crazy about that. Let's look at, let me bring up. See if this looks okay. It's about the same, but let's go back to here. Okay, so this says 1 teach, 1 assist. It's kind of light. Hopefully you have it up. But so that's what I tell our co-teachers is we're trying to move to the right here. And see, I have them labeled teacher-centered structures. So 1 teach, 1 assist. I also put a learn there because we're really talking about after instruction here, but the co-teachers obviously in there when instruction starts. So if they're not familiar with the content, it is absolutely acceptable on our campus that if they have a notebook out, they're helping monitor and they're taking notes so that when we get to interventions, they can be useful and they can be impactful. Team teaching is what I really try to get them to do when they're introducing content. But again, it is teacher-centered. I'll even tell them, I want them to hear your voice. I want you to have a meaningful role at all times. So that team teaching, parallel teaching, it's kind of on the borderline. It can be more student-centered, but again, it's really where you break up. I'm sorry. Let me also make sure we understand the definitions here, which I'll do in a second. Sorry, bad assumption there. But so team teaching would be if I was presenting this with someone else, and we would rotate slides, right? So I do a slide, they do a slide. That's team teaching, right? So what I'll try to get, if you're co-teachers that don't know content, certainly they could read instructions and certainly they could read the warm-up, certainly things like that. But it's important their voice is heard. Parallel teaching is maybe we're both good at the content and we break them into 2 groups right away and we introduce things together and broken up. If they're going to do that, it's really good to have a center space. So and you need to manage the noise level on that one. So what I'm considering student-centered is stations, which is great for review. So you can have your teachers at 2 review stations and then an independent station. Teachers can monitor the stations. When I was in the class, we used to do this thing where we would have an independent station in the middle. So the room on the far side of the room was the general education teacher going over a certain aspect. The middle was like a YouTube lesson, basically, or a review, or a worksheet for review, something that they could work independent. And then the third station is where I was, again, teaching another skill. And they would rotate through with a timer. That's a really nice way to do stations. And you still get that intervention factor. Alternative teach. So alternative teach is very effective. And I'll show you, I have a chart for you guys, which will show you kind of the whole process all the way through. Is very effective, like on proficient, non-proficient, right? So maybe my non-proficient group is the smaller group, or maybe it's the larger group, but each teacher is with each group, basically, in that. So you got 2 data points. So it could be those students. This is also really good on the fly. One of the first things that's not in here that we decided to do is, after our first session, I wanted them being able to co-teach right away. So alternative teach is great for what I call a quick down and dirty thumbs up, thumbs down assessment, or even butcher paper where they put stickies if they need help. So that group that needs help would be that intervention alternative teach group there. Intervention groups, I think, are all the way to the right because in my experience in teaching them to people and also in using them, they are extremely impactful. Work fantastic with scaffolded assessments. Because you see there, I have 3 groups. A teacher is with each of those groups, can also float between groups. But you can provide direct instruction to 4 to 6 students each, and really, really be impactful. Okay, so those are kind of those should be very familiar, but kind of reframed just a little bit to think about teacher, student, make sure we're student-centered, especially after those assessments. So I want you to kind of look at this here. And so I put this together, all three of those skills, again, before we get to retention, which retention is kind of like the icing on the cake there. But these are like the core for our students that don't get it, right? So you see that I have proficient, non-proficient, great for similar groups or mixed grouping, alternative teacher stations. So I kind of give you some ideas there. Scaffolded assessment. You could do mixed grouping, but you see I kind of shaded out like this is great. And for similar groups, intervention going all the way to the right. Our mixed assessments, good for similar grouping, mixed groupings. You can do alternative teach. You can do intervention groups and stations. Stations are great. And I know as a co-teacher, if I had difficult time getting my partner to do stuff or be open to it, the first thing I would do is do unit reviews, kind of like a mixed grouping, to just try to convince them that, hey, let's do stations or intervention groups before our tests. Our grouping is going to be much better. So, all right, and so there's that intervention group matrix there. So if we go back, I'm going to go to the conference. Okay, I'm going to go to, give me 1 second here. There's also, I wanted to share this with you guys. This is something I like to give out, one of those handouts in there where it has the student-centered and these groupings with each other. So, okay, there's the copy of that. And so I'm going to go back here and share here. Hey, all right. So again, you can scan. So let's look at a couple of examples. Okay. So we're going to look at a couple of examples here. So now it says, remember scaffolding data sort. So this again is our 1-step, 2-step, and multi-step equation. So if we look at the bottom, that's the flow all the way through, right? We had a scaffolded assessment that either, again, it can be literally 2 questions on each of those things, or even 1 question from the day before, right? As an exit ticket. It can be, if you're coming up for the end of a unit review. But so how would this look with our structures? Okay, so we have this is what it looks like. Here's a little further breakdown of the classroom if we look at this. So again, here's our scaffolded assessment, similar grouping, intervention groups. 1 teacher, okay, so 1-step equations, we have a teacher there. This does not necessarily, also remember your low group does not necessarily need to be your special education teacher. You might probably want to actually put your content specialist with the students who are struggling the most. 2-step equations, you have another teacher. Then we have a 3rd group of students who are working multi-step equations. They could have a video lesson, which I talked about before, or you could actually you're actually mixing your groupings here if you think about it for a second. This is more of a cooperative grouping. Even though they're similar, they're working together to help answer questions like you would get in a cooperative structure. Teacher can check in. Either teacher can also check in. Because usually what will happen in this, especially with the 2-step equation, is you provide a quick mini lesson, right? The teacher that's there, and then you're monitoring and correcting, and then that allows you to go over and as needed to the other group. So, but those mini lessons are super impactful. I've seen scores go. I remember the last time when I was co-teaching, we did this. We had the lowest scores. And then at the end of the first semester, doing specifically this was like our bread and butter. Our scores were along with the advanced students. So, and when I say scores, I'm talking about 70% or higher. Like I'm talking like a proficiency score. So it's been super impactful in my experience. Okay, so that's an example. And I'll go over, I want to give you one example, but now we want to talk about that retention, okay? and then we'll kind of bring that in as the last part. I'm going to get through that, give you 2 strategies. There's more than 2 strategies. A great book for this, I'll just mention, I don't have it in here, is called Make It Stick. It was actually part of one of the classes I took. I go to Liberty University. That's where I get my PhD from. And it was and that's where I pulled this stuff from. And it's been very effective. So we want to, our strategies that we're going to look at, the students that get it, okay? So we want to strengthen the previously learned material. So previously learned, well, you remember that is, you can be bringing something in that they've already learned. It doesn't have to be equations, right? So, if you had done something else prior, then you could bring that in for them to make their brain go through that process again of like, oh yeah, I remember this. Every time you do that, it strengthens their learning, or reinforce the current learning. And so we're going to look at 2 strategies. So the first strategy is what would be called space practice. So spacing out practice, meaning having kind of a deliberate gap between when you practice things, again, makes you go through that struggle. And every time you do that struggle, you're strengthening your connections in your mind, in your brain, in your learning. So we want to strengthen those connections in our learning. And then the other thing we want to talk about is mixed practice, meaning mixing up what you're practicing, which goes along with that, over cluster practice. So having different type of problems, again, having that struggle where they have to go through different type of problems, and not just the same problem over and over. Yeah, when we need intervention, that's one thing, but we're talking about we've got it and we're trying to strengthen our learning. So having, ratios here, having equations here, having whatever that your content is, mixing that up. Or maybe if you're English, you might analyze a poem, right? And then you might have to write a thesis statement, just jumping and making them struggle through that, gets them real fluid with the skills. So let's say we did spaced or mixed practice. It's really 3 things I'm talking about here. I said 2, but spaced practice means we have some time between it. Mixed practice means the problems change, or there might be 3 different types of problems, 4 different types of problems, 2 different types. So those intervention groups you see there on the left, again, is exactly the same. We're talking about the same thing here. Now, spaced and mixed practice, so combine them there. Students practice previously learned material, power, exponent, order of operations, and expressions. You could have different things there, okay? But they're not just doing more problems, okay? They've shown mastery. They still may be doing some of these in there, but you have other things in there as well. Okay, so that's the first strategy we're talking about. That's previous material. You could throw current material in there as well, as I alluded to. So strengthening current learning. So one of the easiest ways to do that is through peer tutoring, right? So when you teach, we all know when you teach something, you start really strengthening your knowledge of it. So having those students who understand and having those mixed groups, that's where the mixed groupings really help. And so you can have almost as a third teacher is those peer tutors. Because in reality, right, I say 3 groups, but you're going to have, we have 30 students in our class, right? So you may have 2, as a teacher, you may be teaching 2 intervention groups. You could kind of imagine how that expands, and you have to manage those large groups. But this really helps managing those large groups with the peer tutors. So again, here's how that's set up. So once for continuity, I'm using the same lesson, guys. Okay, so intervention groups, peer tutoring. So you see the retention groups over there. They're gonna teach kind of the multi-step equation. So if you have students who've mastered everything, they would help the other students who are almost there. You wouldn't want to put them with the students who are one-step equations, or maybe you will. Maybe my thinking's wrong there, but in my experience, you put them there where the students are almost there, and they can help them. And of course, you're still checking in, and they're strengthening their knowledge because they're explaining it, they're talking about it. So this is what I'm meaning by retention. So it's memory retention. You could call it extension as well, right? It's an extension. So honestly, when I put it together, I like the ring of it, and I was thinking memory retention because that's how it's presented in the book. But there are many strategies in the book, but these are two of the most effective. And if you look even at Hattie's research, you'll see that these are highly impactful and ways to get those other students involved and make sure. You could, of course, have traditional extension activities there, if it's a project. And again, I'm just kind of wetting your whistle here. But you could see how the groupings work for sure. Okay. Now, kind of how we're going to finish this up, I did want to share some planning tools with you as well. So first, before we move into that, is there any questions? Like I've covered the 4 skills, right? The skills, right? We covered the assessment skills. We covered the grouping skills, understanding co-teach structures, and the memory retention, 3 memory retention strategies. Anyone have any questions about that before I want to show you guys some planning documents that have been effective and that I'm sharing, as well as the high leverage practices and talk about anything you guys want to talk about as far as lessons learned as implementing this. So does anyone have any questions up to this point? We have about 17 minutes left in this session, looks like. Okay. So now if you want to look in that drive, again, Gabby did put it there for us as well again. So what we're going to look at here is 2 different planning templates, okay? I'm going to make this a little bigger for you guys. This is a really simple one. And this is really adapted from, I expanded this from Dr. Friend's work on co-teaching, and our district shares something similar, but this is a little more detailed to what we're talking about. So this is just a week at a glance, okay? And I've used this one before personally, and it is effective. So you just have your activity that you're doing. This is just the activity, the assessment type, right, that you're going to use, what your grouping structures will look like. And then on the end, of course, we've got that other thing we're not talking about, which I think in my experience, our teachers, at least in our district, are really good at the accommodations and modifications. But so making sure that all this is notated. So this gives you a planning document to share with them. And the second one I'm going to share with you, the last time I was in the classroom, we started with that one, but we actually switched to this, and I'll show you why. My general education teacher that I was with just found it a little easier because what we did is we basically took the pacing calendar and put the dates at the top, and then the activities were in the pacing calendar. I just added these 2 blocks underneath. So it became a very quick way for us to communicate what we were doing. And keeping in mind that this cycle as well will take a few days. You may not get to everything right away, right? You're going to have instruction, practice. One thing I would even look at, there's something called a scaffolded instruction model. I like to try to get our co-teachers to do that and kind of integrate this with that. So if you have kind of interest in that, you could kind of reach out to me. I'll give you my contact information. I'd be happy to share that with you too. We don't have kind of the time to go into that here. But whatever instructional model you have, it can fit in very nicely. And this lets you kind of implement that cycle. but it also helps. One of the most important things in a multi-tiered system, I believe, is planning for that intervention, right? And allowing time in your plans for that intervention, not just in times that are outside school, really those tier one interventions. It really allows you to plan for those. So that's in there. That's in that resource for you. The next thing, let me share this here. Back to this one. The high leverage practices these are high leverage practices in special education, and so I discovered these again as I was in school and started using them, and they're a great resource. So what I'm going to do is go to the site. What I'll do here too is, let's see if we can actually drop that in there for you guys as well. Anyway, let me do it off the actual site. That'll be better. Sorry, guys. Let me do this. There it is. So at the bottom there, that takes you to the site. Let me share this site with you. Okay. So the Council for Exceptional Children, in particular, the practices that focus on instruction are very good, and it gives you a resource. So in partnership with the Cedar Center, so that's where these came out, they focus on collaboration, assessment, social emotional behavior, and instruction. So some things we're not talking about, like social emotional behavior, they have recommendations. This is a fantastic site and resource. I know your state might be all over it, but I know in Texas, there is not as prevalent as I would expect. So I kind of gave this, I like to give this as a resource just for you to peruse. We're not going to go over it or anything here. But it is a very good, you can go by topic. And again, you can look at these practices. And as you get there, they have articles that come out. You can actually dive in. They actually have some videos. Most of the videos are going to be at the elementary level, but I'm a secondary school, and I'm not sure I mentioned that, but they are very, very good. So the last thing kind of I was going to share with you is one thing that kind of came about as we were doing this, and I've just created this channel, is because when you start thinking about this, really comes to kind of implementing it through a campus, is this realization that, okay, what if we get new teachers? So the way that we're doing this right now is we're doing these sessions. So like the first session was just going over the structures and some roles and responsibilities for the teachers, and things they could do like tomorrow. That's kind of the way so it doesn't go in this order, right? So I introduced those structures with our campus coordinator, and gave some quick strategies like the thumbs up, thumbs down to group students. And so you could intervene, or using sticky notes. I actually had them use sticky notes as they came in, like with their birthday month. You can do something like that if you were teaching this, and say, hey, look, you're all in 3 groups, or you're all in 4 groups, or however you break up the months. So then we started talking about kind of like an academy. So that's what the purpose of this channel will be. I don't have anything on there yet, but if you're interested on this, follow it. I'm going to start putting out material this year, so that our new teachers, kind of like our sessions, and you're definitely welcome to use those, or if you're interested in that. And again, it's I use the educational scientists because I want to make that connection to our teachers. Like, hey, we need to be kind of scientists in the classroom, and we need to bring those research practices into the classroom. So I'll also drop that in for you guys as well, just the actual channel. So if not, no pressure, but it is out there for a resource. Okay, so I'm going to kind of open it up. We have about 9 minutes. So I got through that a little quicker, because usually when I do that, I have it's with the live audience, and there's a little more Q&A as we go. But so go ahead and open it up. Gabby, I can't hear you. You can hear me, right? Hopefully this whole time. Okay, good. Gabby, you're on mute right now. I can see you're mute. Gabby, your mic is off.
Okay, give it another try.
You're good now.
Okay. I was saying, I think that if you mute yourself, it might mute me. I'm not too sure. But yeah, it's okay. A lot of the comments in the chat you were able to get to, which were great. There's not any Q&A right now, but I know we still have about a few minutes to go. If anybody has anything that they'd like to put in the chat there.
I dropped my work email in there. If you guys have any questions, you can also reach out to me afterwards. I didn't have that in the slide, sorry.
Thank you. No, that's perfect. And Madeline actually has a quick question here. She says, what is a good place to start when helping co-teachers as an instructional coach? Her school has co-teachers in grades pre-K through second. That's a great one.
That is a good one. So where I like to start is you want to give them something, and where we started this year was when we had our first session is I want to give them something they can do tomorrow. So a couple really easy strategies, and you could do this with young students too, is I just call it thumbs up, thumbs down, right? So basically we would, I don't have a lot of second grade instruction on my mind, but so I'll use a high school example if you can extrapolate it. So if we go through a lesson and we do the one of paraphrasing, all right. Hey, so we give a lesson on paraphrasing and we say, hey, do you understand? Give me a thumbs up. If you don't understand, give me a thumbs down, and you can break into groups that way real quickly. Okay, everyone who didn't understand, come over here. So I like to give stuff they can do right away. Another one you can do with older students, and actually did it with my teachers, is as they walked in, I did like 3 months at a time, like poster boards, and I had them get a sticky and write their name and put the poster boards had like months on it for birthdays, and they just went around. And I just show, because you can do that in class, right? You can have, I need more help. I kind of get it. I'm an expert. And they can put the stickies in, and they're breaking themselves in groups for tomorrow. So I would focus on those type of strategies. And there's always a simple strategy of, hey guys, who needs more help? That's kind of your just down and dirty. Who needs more help? You're going to come with Mr. Logan. And I know my wife's a middle school co-teacher, and kind of that's the one she loves to do. So hopefully that answers it. But that's where I'd start. But it is important. I think I want to reiterate, and kind of the whole point is, like, a lot of stuff's not new, but the whole point is that everyone on your campus needs to be on the same page. So your real start is, as an instructional leader, is with your leadership. Okay, what does good co-teaching look like? What do we expect to see if the principal walks through, vice principal, instructional leader, department coordinator? I'm not sure how everyone's broken up. Someone from campus, from district walks through. What does it look like here at our school? And defining those things and breaking them into skills for them.
Awesome. Thank you, Aaron. There's another question in here from Trisha. She says, how do you assign co-teachers? Is it a volunteer basis? And then Stephanie right below is kind of going off of that as well. Do you take into consideration the skill set and experience levels of those teachers when choosing, for example, a master teacher paired with a new and novice teacher? So those two are kind of combined.
Yeah, so those are great questions. So in Texas, it's a teaching. I'm not sure how all the other states work. I apologize, but it's a teaching position that they're hired for, and so there's a certification the special education K through 12 certification for Texas that they pass. And so that allows them, that they may not have a content area, but their expertise is supposed to be in interventions and modifications and accommodations. So that's how on our campus we have a certain number of co-teachers assigned based on the number of teachers with the number of students, with IEPs. So, and unfortunately in Texas, in our district, the way it works is they're also a case manager, which means they check in on about 15 to 20 students at the high school level, who they do all their data for, who they do all the ARDS paperwork for, and all that stuff. I know some other places it's broken up into 2 jobs, but in my district it's not. And I see there's a kind of a piggyback question on that.
I think I read that one. It was from Stephanie, just wondering.
Yeah, so you can do that. The best thing to do is continuity, I believe. Meaning, if you get a good pair together, it's very tempting to say, I have a strong co-teacher here and I have a teacher. What often happens is a teacher who has issues managing behavior might get a co-teacher who's very experienced and they're really in there to manage that behavior. I would warn against that some. I mean, you can do that. There's pros and cons. You got to decide what's best. Certainly, I've seen on our campus, we have a very experienced co-teacher, and we do have her with newbie English teachers. And she's done a great job because she's been in the content so long at kind of getting them out of the lecture status, right? Where they just, front of the room, let's lecture. And she has a really good way of doing that. But not every some co-teachers will get absolutely frustrated with that. So it's kind of a case-by-case thing. If you have a co-teacher who is willing to do that, but I would have the conversation with them for sure. And it might be more indicative to go and give that teacher those behavior strategies, because I didn't really talk about those, but obviously there's behavior strategies and setting up those processes and all those good things so that students are engaged and on task. Hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah.
It's kind of a mix, but I would talk to your co-teacher. I wouldn't just do it.
Definitely. No, that totally makes sense. And experience, I was a co-teacher as well when I taught 4th grade. So you're right, it's kind of a mix. It depends on, your district and what the state says. I'm here in Texas also, so 100% agree. But this was so great, Aaron, just being able to understand, those systems and the methods that co-teachers can use to meet the needs of all students, so that gap doesn't widen, that achievement gap doesn't widen. And we're so thankful also for the resources you provided, the grouping tools. These are great to hold on to. Hopefully everybody got a chance to get those QR codes and put them into your browser and save them for later.
Yeah, and again, my email is just my name, and then so it's aaron.logan@nisd.net. And please reach out, and I'm gonna say, first of all, I might be running around, but I will get back to you. And if you lost a link or you have questions, because if you are interested in doing this, I have like 2 other presentations that we just did to actually teach it. So, and again, that stuff I'll be putting out hopefully on that channel. Really is for our teachers, but I have no problem sharing that as a resource.
Great. Thank you, Aaron. Appreciate it. Everybody who joined us, thank you so much. This does conclude our session here at day 1 for the Branching Minds Summit. Right now, it's going to have about 15 minutes of networking. So if you'd like to go and network and meet with other educators, please feel free to do so. And hopefully we will see everybody back again tomorrow for day 2.